Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Fly Tying Tuesdays. My name is Max and today we're going to be tying the Shimmer swimmer. So in the vise I got a fire hole 811 size 4. The front hook will be a 811 and a size 2. I'll be using some white marabou blood quills, white schlappen, MFC minnow brush, and a UV pearl, some hairline 3D beads in white, Senyo's trailer wire, a Vivus 6/0 thread in white, the MFC sparkle eyes in the black nickel and blue, and some crazy legs in pearl. And I'm also going to be using the Senyo's laser dub in white. Let's go ahead and start my thread just behind the eye. Work it back to about halfway and snip out my thread. So the Shimmer swimmer is a cross of kind of like a ganga and a sparkle minnow. It's really good on bright days. Really, when the sun hits it, it really sparkles in the water. It's got a good profile to it. Kind of looks like a small rainbow. So I like to fish it on bright days. So I kind of prep my piece of white marabou blood quill. I like the blood quills because they're a little bit longer. So once I got that kind of trimmed up, measure it out before I tie it in. Kind of like a big bushy tail, especially using these brushes. The brush fibers are super long, so if you don't have a long enough tail, it'll kind of cover up the tail. So kind of make sure that your tail is maybe a little bit longer than you'd think. So go ahead and make some loose wraps. Kind of adjust it, make sure it's where I want, and then making sure that marabou stays on top of the shank. Work that thread back up towards the eye. And snip it out. So if you grab a real sparse piece of marabou, you can always throw another little piece on top. So I'm going to do, I just want this fly to be real full and have a lot of action to it in the water. So get another little piece of marabou in there. I'll work my thread back again. Kind of measure up those fibers, those feathers, and make some more loose wraps to start it. Make sure you got them measured up. Keep it on top. Keep tension on my thread, working back up towards the eye. Snip it out. I'll really make some tight wraps down, and I'm always ending my thread wraps kind of right where that barb would be. Gonna take my piece of schlappen for the back one, kind of like a thinner piece of schlappen. Kind of comb those fibers forward and give myself a tie-in point and tie in that piece of schlappen. And work it back to where I finished. Now trim out this little tag. Keep that slopping out of the way. Now I'll take my brush, work that back where I tied in my piece of slopping, and I'll bring my thread up to just behind the eye, and I'll do a quick whip finish. Take my cradle, I'll lay my slopping right behind my brush. Gonna tease these fibers back a little bit so they don't get trapped. They're all sticking out perpendicular. Take my brush, lay that down even with the slopping, and then take my dubbing tool with the gator grip on there and grab it. Once I got those pinched in my gator grip and they're both tight, can start spinning it up. So get a couple spins in there. Take my brush, work some of those slopping feathers that get tied up to each other. Now, use my rotary feature on my vise. If you don't have a rotary feature, you can just make wraps, kind of palmering it around the shank. It's a little bit tougher, but can still be done pretty easily. Start working my way up towards the eye, kind of getting even wraps, and I'm going to keep teasing back my slopping and brush with each wrap. Now on this back part, I might have mentioned before, I really like a thin piece of slopping, and then on the front hook, like a little bit thicker, wider piece of slopping. Builds up a little bit bulkier body in the front, a little bit finer body in the back to really have a nice taper to it. Once I get up just behind the eye, take my thread off the bobbin cradle and make some loose wraps. Pull everything back out of the way. Some tight wraps. Undo my gator grip and snip out the brush and the slopping. Kind of clean up. Make a couple more tight wraps, and then go back in with the brush and kind of comb everything forward and then comb it back. Really get those fibers untrapped. I'm gonna take my crazy legs, my pearl crazy legs, and I'm just gonna half it on my thread and tie in the side closest to me first. Some loose wraps to start. I can cinch it down a little bit. Take my second piece and work the other side. I make some loose wraps to start and then start cinching it down, because if you try to make just tight wraps right away, the legs kind of like puff out away from the body. So when you do it like that and you kind of start slow and then build some tension, they lay down a little bit flatter to the body. So keeping those legs out of the way, I'll do a whip finish. Tighten it down, snip out my thread, then I like to hit it with a little bit of super glue so none of those wraps come undone. And then trim out just a little bit on the legs, kind of at an angle. And we get back in there with my thread, just starting behind the eye to about halfway, and snip out tag end. And stop just behind the eye. And this one I like to tie in my eyes first, so that when I tie in the wire it's so thick that it doesn't lay down flat against the shank. So tie your eyes in first and then add the intruder wire. So make some wraps on top, figure 8, some loose wraps, and then we'll flip it. And then when we hit it with super glue, once we get the wire on there, they're not going to move. Take my piece of intruder wire, measure it up just behind the eyes, make some loose wraps, and start working my way back up to behind the eyes. So I like it right on top, but a little bit off center to the side closest to me, so that other piece can lay right along the side of it and still on top. And that way the back half of your articulated body really sits straight up and down, and the hook point rides the same as the front. Build up a nice little thread body, and then we'll add the back half of the fly. So I got my 3D beads in white, really cool kind of iridescent beads, real great for segmenting streamer bodies, available right here at AvidMax. I'm going to take 2 beads, I'm going to add them onto my wire, And then I'm going to take the back portion of my fly. I'm going to go up through the eye with my wire. And then I'm going to go back through both beads. Kind of measure out how big of a loop I want back there. So I'm just going to make some loose wraps to start it, and then I'll kind of measure it up. Once I got a little bit of gap, I don't want it so tight where it's pinching in and it's not able to move freely. Make some tight, hard wraps right at the back, making sure that loop kind of stays up and down. And then kind of measure out my wire. I'm gonna go back in there with my Leatherman and just gonna trim out my wire right behind the eyes. Work some loose wraps up to the front, just behind the eyes. And then I can start cranking down. Build up a nice little thread body. Nice tight wraps. I'll leave my thread just behind my dumbbell eyes. Take some of my super glue or Zap-A-Gap. A little bit on there, and then cover that up with my thread. I'll let that super glue dry for a sec. Now I've got a little bit bulkier piece of schlappen, so I'm going to do the same thing I did before, kind of tease those feathers the opposite way. Since I've got a short little spot to work with here, I kind of want to make sure that I'm using the longer feathers, working my way down the body of the schlappen feather. So I'll start it a little bit further than before. So I'll take my brush and I'll tie that in right on top of that schlappen. Work it back to where those beads are, and work my thread back up to the front. So once I got my brush, my schlappen tied in, I'm going to take both pieces together, kind of make sure all those fibers are pulled apart, pulled out. So take my brush, start twisting that up. Make a couple twists, go in with my brush, and kind of try and separate some of those schlappen feathers from one another. Make a couple more twists. Separate those feathers out. Then start making wraps. Each time teasing all those fibers back. Make sure I don't trap too many a little bit tight on space. So I'll take my gator grip off and I'll just hold the rest in my hand and make another turn going up to the eyes. Make sure we get all that in there. Go ahead and capture it. Make a couple turns in front, a couple behind. Really locking that brush down and trim it out as close as I can. Make a couple more tight wraps before we brush it out. Take another 2 pieces of my silly leg, the crazy legs, and I'll have those on my thread, same as before, right on the side. Couple loose wraps, and then start tightening them down. Play with them, make sure you got them where you want them. Take the other strand. Got some of my Senyo's laser dub, super long, thick fibers, and to prepare them, I kind of rip them apart and keep stacking them up on top of each other until I kind of get the thickness desired. So I'm going to lay that first piece right on top, kind of spread it out a little bit, make a couple loose wraps, and let that one sit there. Prepare another piece for the bottom. This one be a little bit thinner so that I don't crowd the hook gap too much. I'm going to brush it out and pull it all back, but always a little bit thinner on the bottom. Make sure my legs are out of the way. Put it right on the bottom. Make a loose wrap. Kind of position it. Kind of cinch it down, and then I'm going to pull both pieces back and make a couple turns in front. So if you put too many wraps with this dubbing material, you get kind of like a segment in between this strip, and the less you use, the more flush and full it looks together instead of having little gaps. So bring my thread up in front of the eyes. So I'll prep another piece of my laser dub. This material is very similar to the new fly fish food bruiser blend. I think the bruiser blends just have a little bit different blend of colors. It kind of works the same. I also think with what colors you use, the material is a little bit coarser or finer depending on the color. So just kind of be aware of that when you're working with this stuff. Next strip is going to be a little bit thinner than the first one I did on top. So I'll kind of split it in half, pull everything back, make a two loose wraps, kind of slide everything back, make sure it's up against those eyes, and then give it a hard tug, kind of cinch everything down. And prep another piece for the bottom. Place right up in there. Try and make a loose wrap right underneath. You can cinch it down a little bit. And then pull both pieces back. And make some hard wraps just behind the eye. Build up a little bit of a thread head just to make sure it kind of pushes that dubbing back, and some tight securing wraps. Wet my fingers a little bit, make sure everything's pulled back, and then whip finish. Try to use as few wraps as you can, but enough to hold it in there tight. I'll take my brush, brush out that. Kind of like to pull up, kind of blend those fibers together. Thin it out a little bit. Pull these ones down. Same thing, kind of blend them together. Pull out some of those loose ones. If it wasn't called the Shimmer Swimmer, it might be like the cockatoo or something. Now I can kind of comb everything back. Might thin out the bottom a little bit more so it doesn't crowd that hook gap. It should be pretty good. And it looks super puffy right now, but in the water it still holds a good profile, but it definitely slims everything down a little bit. Take my fine side, pull those pieces back. So at this stage, some people like to trim the Senyo's dub or the fly fish food bruiser blend stuff. I kind of like to leave it long and then just leave it a little sparse on the bottom. I think it gives a little bit better profile overall to the fly. It makes it look a little more fishy, especially when it gets wet. So last thing, trim my legs at a little bit of an angle, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of super glue to those thread wraps. Try not to get any on the blend. And there you have it. Pav's Shimmer Swimmer. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, make sure you give us a thumbs up and drop a comment down below. For more fly fishing and outdoor related videos, subscribe to the AvidMax YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you out there.